Hey guys, tonight we're headed somewhere a little unexpected. Not into the heart of battle with thundering hooves and arrows whistling through the air, but into a felt-lined tent filled with scrolls, ledgers, and the faint smell of fermented milk. We're going deep into the surprising stillness of the Mongol Empire, not as a warrior or a noble, but as someone who holds a different kind of power, Genghis Khan's bookkeeper. It's the early 13th century, and the winds over the steppe carry more than just dust. They carry change, empire-sized change. But you've just arrived in Karakoram, the Mongol capital, and your greatest weapon is not a bow, but a quill, maybe a few sharp glances. You wear robes instead of armor, and your fingers are ink-stained instead of bloodied. Still, you probably won't survive this job, not because of battle, but because someone might accidentally poison your tea over a miscalculated wool shipment. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You duck under the leather flap of the central ledger tent and immediately get hit with the smell. Stale parchment, boiled sheep hide, and someone's forgotten garlic dumplings. Welcome to Karakoram, the nerve center of an empire that stretches from the Pacific to the Caspian, where armies move like storms and paperwork follows in their wake. You shuffle past stacks of scrolls tied with sinew and fur, each marked with symbols denoting cattle counts, tax payments, or lists of newly conquered villages that now owe the Khan tribute. You weren't born into this. No one is born a Mongol bookkeeper. It's a role you're appointed to, either because you showed an aptitude for counting sheep without falling asleep, or because someone in power liked your handwriting. You're not Mongol by blood. Most of the scribes aren't. The empire doesn't care about ethnicity as long as you're useful, and in your case, you're just useful enough to be kept around and not useful enough to be dangerous. Your gur, or felted tent, sits just outside the larger encampment, where the nobility dine on roasted meat and recite battle stories. You sleep near the scribe quarters, where the lullaby is usually a combination of snoring, paper rustling, and a rooster who hasn't figured out time zones. Still, there's a peacefulness here that the outside world would never expect from the Horde. Karakoram is deceptively quiet for a city forged in conquest. Inside the administrative tents, people speak in murmurs. Not because they fear the Khan, though they should, but because paper demands concentration. And also because nobody wants to disturb the guy who manages the grain tallies. He's been twitchy ever since someone stole a bushel and left a fake receipt drawn on goatskin. The streets, more like packed dirt pathways, are filled with a mix of traders, scribes, messengers, and animals that all seem slightly smarter than you'd expect. The occasional Persian merchant wanders past you with wide eyes, marveling that this sprawling empire even functions. You'd like to say it's all thanks to your work behind the scenes, but you mostly just track how many yak hides go missing each month. Spoiler, it's always 3. You suspect a conspiracy. You begin your mornings with a ceremonial pot of salted tea, shared in silence with fellow clerks. No one talks until at least the second pour. There's something oddly sacred about those few minutes, as if boiling water and crushed herbs can make you forget that you're about to spend 12 hours deciphering a shepherd's spelling of goat. Each day, a courier brings in new records from the provinces. These aren't neatly filed reports, they're scrap bark, cloth scribbles, occasionally the side of a turtle shell. It's your job to transcribe them into the official ledgers, which are themselves made of stitched animal hide, and, if you're lucky, a decent run of mulberry paper from the East. You get the good stuff if no one else has bribed the supply runner. Sometimes there are surprises. A courier once brought in a report written entirely in verse. Another time, someone attached a small sack of dried berries as proof of tax. You spent 10 minutes chewing on the evidence before realizing it was meant for the Khan's hunting falcons. Oops. Historians still argue whether Karakoram ever had a fixed layout or if it was more of a semi-permanent sprawl shaped by whim, weather, and whatever visiting dignitary required a tent with embroidered walls. From where you sit, the only permanent structure is the complaint box nailed to a post near the livestock pens. It's empty, of course. No one dares put anything in it. But despite the informality, everything somehow flows. Ledgers get filled, taxes get collected, eventually. Trade continues. And once a week, a ceremonial review is held, where high-ranking officials pretend to understand the paperwork you prepared. They nod, stroke their beards, and then ask you to read it out loud in a completely different dialect because someone forgot to translate it. Again. There's a delicate balance here. Your role is essential but invisible. If things go wrong, your name's the first to be called. If they go right, you're rewarded with slightly better ink and a mildly encouraging nod. You might think at this point that life as a bookkeeper would be dull, repetitive, maybe even mind-numbing. And you'd be right. But there's also a quiet pride in it. You are one of the thin lines holding this empire together. Without your records, who knows how many horses have gone missing? Who knows if taxes were paid, or if the silk intended for the Khan's concubines was instead lining the saddle of some greedy general? You dip your quill again, eyes squinting in the dusty glow of your oil lamp. Outside, the wind whistles through the tent poles and a wolf howls in the distance. But in here, it's just numbers, scrolls, the steady rhythm of ink to hide. And somewhere, far above your station, a warlord rests easy, not knowing his empire is balanced on the careful calculations of a man in a moth-eaten robe who once accidentally filed a yak as a camel. You wake up to the sound of a spoon clinking against a metal pot. Again. It's the quartermaster, reheating something that was technically soup 3 days ago, but now just smells like boiled onions and defeat. You rub your eyes and stretch, your joints cracking like ancient bindings. Another day in paradise. Your first assignment today is deceptively exciting. You've been asked to help inventory supplies for an upcoming siege. Not in the way warriors do it, with drills, war cries, and sharpening swords, but in the way that involves sitting cross-legged with a slate, writing down how many bundles of rope you have versus how many were promised. Spoiler, the math will not add up. It never does. You trudge over to the central supply tent, the one flanked by guards who smell like they bathed in horse sweat. Inside, sacks of dried turnips lean precariously against barrels of fermented mare's milk, and someone's trying to pass off 7 cracked helmets as slightly distressed. The supply master, a rotund man with permanent curry stains on his tunic, hands you a reed pen and tells you to make it make sense. You begin with arrows, crates and crates of them, their fletching dyed in different colors depending on which unit they're meant for. You count slowly, trying not to jab yourself. It's a surprisingly zen activity until you find a whole bundle filled with mismatched heads, stone, bone, iron, even one that looks suspiciously like a repurposed spoon. Someone's been getting creative again. Mainstream historians like to focus on the brutality of the Mongol war machine, the mass slaughters, the clever siege tactics, the psychological warfare. What they rarely mention is the sheer bureaucracy required to keep those campaigns moving. For every horse archer thundering across the plains, there were 3 people counting stirrups, inventorying jerky, and measuring out how much fermented milk would spoil in a week. Fun fact, it's 3 days, no matter what you do. And you? You're the guy writing it all down, carefully, in triplicate. Next on your list, siege equipment. There's a shipment of Chinese-designed trebuchets that's supposed to arrive today from the eastern workshops. One of the engineers stops by with what he insists is a compact prototype, which you politely inform him is a glorified slingshot. He sulks, muttering something about early-stage innovation. As you double-check requisition slips, a courier trots in on a surprisingly well-groomed donkey. He delivers a wax-sealed message with a dramatic flourish, like he's just handed you news of a royal birth. You break the seal. It's a request to adjust the lentil rations for Division 14 due to increased flatulence complaints. You sigh. Some parts of Empire maintenance are less glamorous than others. There's a brief interruption when one of the camp dogs runs off with a tally scroll and you have to chase it through a maze of crates. You finally retrieve the scroll, drenched in slobber but mostly legible, and return to your makeshift desk just in time to catch the supply master mislabeling a barrel of dried fish as spices. You raise an eyebrow. He winks. "They'll never know," he says. Historians still argue whether Mongol logistics were truly centralized or if regional commanders largely improvised. From your perch in the middle of it, it feels like a beautiful disaster. Half well-oiled mechanism, half we'll fix it on the way. One day you're writing up reports for a siege in Samarkand, the next you're being asked to calculate how many goats can fit in a convoy cart without chewing through the ropes. Answer: fewer than you'd think. As the sun arcs over Karakoram, you take a brief break, not for leisure, mind you, just to stretch your legs and sip some slightly curdled yogurt water while staring blankly at a distant flock of birds. The world beyond the encampment seems endless, and also mildly hostile. You prefer your ledgers. You return to your tent and begin logging your counts into the main register. Each item has its own code, hand-developed by a long-dead genius with a love of obscure runes and a hatred of vowels. You mutter under your breath as you translate 14 bundles of tarred rope into a line that reads more like a spell than a sentence. Someone sneezes loudly behind you. You turn to see a junior scribe who's managed to spill ink all over the scrolls you just finished. For a moment, time stands still. You exhale slowly. He apologizes profusely. You wave it off. Just another day in paradise, you tell yourself. As evening falls, the smell of roasting meat wafts in from the noble quarters. You and the other clerks dine on a thin stew and flatbread that's mostly ash. One of your colleagues tries to cheer everyone up by recounting a dream he had in which he invented a number that meant approximately, and everyone just started using it. "We could call it ish," he suggests. You laugh. You're tired. Before bed, you check your figures once more. Arrows? Counted. Rations? Logged. Fermented milk barrels? Dubiously stable. Siege equipment? Half delivered, half theoretical. You tuck your quill behind your ear and lean back, feeling the faint ache of a day spent hunched over uneven parchment. You've survived another day without anyone mistaking your records for treason. That's a win. As the camp quiets down and the stars begin to spill across the velvet sky, you slip into your bedroll, the distant sounds of horses nickering and scribes whispering equations lulling you toward sleep. You dream of numbers, or at least you hope they're numbers. One of them might be a camel. You're up before the sun, mostly because your tent mate has developed a snore that could be mistaken for a Mongol war horn. You shuffle into your felt boots, wrap yourself in your scribe's robe, still stiff with yesterday's ink spills, and step out into the thin, cold morning air. The city of Karakoram doesn't sleep much, but it does have this brief moment of hush, right before the campfires crackle back to life and oxen start their slow grumbles. Today is a scroll day. You trudge across the camp to the archive tent, a grand name for what is essentially a dome of stitched felt and camel hide, reinforced with crooked wooden poles. It leans slightly to one side, as if exhausted by its own contents. Inside, scrolls, hundreds, maybe thousands, bundled, rolled, knotted, tagged, half mildewed, some so old the ink has faded into ghostly lines. This is where your life will vanish, inch by inch, quill stroke by quill stroke. Your job today is to organize a census record that came in from the steppes west of the Irtysh River. It's written in 4 languages, none of them yours, and smells faintly of pickled onions. You smooth the pages on the desk, weighed down by a jar of yak butter, and prepare for the quiet labor of translation and transcription. It's not glamorous, but then again, neither is conquest. At least you're less likely to be run through with a spear. This is your office. Not a marble hall, not a palace. A tent sagging under the weight of administration. You sit cross-legged on a rug that might once have been decorative, now just a map of ink blots and mysterious crumbs. Your tools? A knife to trim quills, 2 pots of ink, black for records, red for corrections, and a rag you swear is more important than any weapon in the Mongol arsenal. You spend hours copying each line. Family, 4 goats, 2 children, 1 grandmother, missing toe, very good at singing. You raise your eyebrow. The margin notes are often personal, sometimes bizarre. One scribe in a border post seemed obsessed with nose shapes. Another documented every birth with a guess about the baby's future. Likely to steal, destined for priesthood, or, your favorite, possibly a fish. You pause halfway through a particularly smudged column. It's not in any script you recognize. You call over Batu, one of the older scribes with a memory like an elephant and the posture of a question mark. He squints, sniffs the parchment, and declares, it's probably early Uyghur, or a prank. He wanders off before clarifying. Historians still argue whether the Mongol Empire had a centralized record-keeping system or if it simply mimicked one convincingly. What you know is this: the scrolls keep coming, every day, from every corner, and they never ever go away. Once a piece of information enters the archive tent, it becomes eternal. Until a goat eats it, which has happened more than once. Around midday, the light shifts, and you reposition your oil lamp. Its flickering glow catches on the gold leaf emblem of the Great Khan, stamped atop every official scroll. You pause and wonder, does Genghis Khan know that his seal ends up on notes about barley rot, about village disputes over a 3-legged pig? Probably not. Sometimes you fantasize about what it would be like to leave your post, just walk away, scroll in hand, and disappear into the grasslands. But then you remember you'd last a day without your tent, 2 without your ink, and maybe 3 before someone mistook you for a low-value hostage. There's a calm that comes with repetition. Copying text by hand has a rhythm to it, like breathing or chewing, or the clop-clop of a messenger's horse in the distance. The hours pass in quiet blur. Occasionally, someone brings in a fresh pot of tea or shouts for an ink runner to refill the supply. But mostly it's just you and the paper. Late in the afternoon, something rare happens. A delivery of premium scroll paper arrives. It's silky, finely pressed, and allegedly imported from the Chinese heartlands. Everyone gathers around like it's treasure. You're given 2 sheets to test. You write on it carefully, reverently, like a monk illuminating scripture. The ink doesn't bleed. It's perfect. You promptly hide one of the sheets under your rug for future use. A petty rebellion, yes, but a satisfying one. Across the tent, your fellow scribe Dallin is arguing with a courier over whether smoke damage is a valid reason for late census reports. The yurt burned down, the courier insists. Dallin points out that the sheep counts are all intact. Priorities, the courier says with a shrug. By now, your scroll is almost complete. Your hand cramps, your knees ache. But there's a small pleasure in the neatness of it all, the steady rows, the tidy columns. You know these records will be stored, maybe consulted, possibly ignored, but they exist. That counts for something. You pause, quill in hand, and look at the walls of the tent, lined with years of effort, names and numbers and notes penned by hundreds of hands. Some scribes left marks of themselves, a curling flourish here, a smudge there, a joke tucked into the index. You've done the same in your own way. Somewhere, deep in a ledger about livestock losses in the Volga region, is a tiny doodle of a goat wearing a crown. No one's found it yet. As the sun drops behind the steppe, the interior of the tent turns gold, then gray. You pack up, stretch once more, and glance over your shoulder before leaving. The archive tent looms silently, sagging slightly, full of voices frozen in ink. Outside, it's colder. Your breath curls like smoke as you make your way back to your tent. You pass a group of warriors recounting tales by firelight. You pass a merchant sharpening a stylus. You pass a child carrying a chicken like it's a prized sword. No one sees the records. No one celebrates the ledgers. But every number you copied today feeds the machine. And tomorrow you'll do it again. Unless, of course, the goats eat your scroll. It starts with a simple question, one that ruins your entire morning. How do we tax someone who doesn't stay put? You look up from your tally sheet, quill frozen mid-stroke. The administrator across from you, freshly reassigned from somewhere warmer and more bureaucratically inclined, has dropped this puzzle on your lap like it's a casual afterthought. You blink at him. He smiles. You squint, hoping it's a joke. It's not. Taxing nomads. It's the problem no one ever solved cleanly. But here you are, a low-ranking bookkeeper in the Mongol administration, now expected to figure it out in between counting yak hides and convincing your inkpot not to freeze. You begin your investigation where all great administrative disasters start, with a map that's out of date. Your corner of the archive contains what you generously call the cartographic collection, which is actually just a stack of mismatched skins and papers, each featuring vague sketches of mountain ranges, trade routes, and something someone once labeled, "Here be wolves." You stare at them for hours, tracing migration paths, trying to overlay trade taxes onto people who don't believe in borders. There's a growing understanding in your circle of fellow clerks. Mongol governance is a strange beast, On one side, there's brute force, conquest, loyalty, punishment. On the other, this sprawling, fragile web of record-keeping, resource management, and yes, taxation. Genghis Khan didn't just want power, he wanted it to last. And that meant figuring out how to make nomads pay up. You start gathering reports. In one, a regional officer tried to tax herders by counting the number of hooves in their camp and dividing by 4. In another, someone used how much dung was left behind as a tax metric. You're not sure if that one's a joke. You hope it's a joke. One scroll describes an ingenious attempt, a portable tax booth, that followed herder caravans for a month at a time. The administrator responsible allegedly died of boredom and milk poisoning. Historians still argue whether the Mongols ever managed to tax their own with true consistency or simply used occasional enforcement as a form of gentle threat. You begin to suspect it was mostly the latter. The threat of paperwork might have been more terrifying than actual taxes. You spend a week developing your own solution. It involves color-coded tokens given to clan leaders, redeemable for grain, salt, or iron goods, with a simple return system based on the weight of goods exchanged. Elegant, efficient, completely incomprehensible to everyone outside your tent. You pitch it to your supervisor during the weekly administrative council. He listens politely, then suggests you simplify. You simplify. He suggests more simplification. Eventually, you're down to give goat, get salt, which, to be fair, is easier to understand. Afterward, you sit by the fire with your friend Tamuk, who has worked in 3 regions and speaks 6 languages badly. He tells you the key isn't in counting, it's in watching. People know when they're being watched, he says, swirling a bowl of broth. Herders don't want a ledger following them around. You make a note of that, literally. You begin drafting a new policy, one that leans less on strict taxation and more on negotiated tribute. You even propose training local informants who travel with nomadic groups and report seasonal output. You're not reinventing the wheel, you're just making it slightly less squeaky. Then comes the question no one likes to answer. What if they don't pay? You've seen what happens then. The Khan's justice is swift. Sometimes entire clans are relocated, forced to settle so they're easier to manage. Other times, gifts of silk and grain mysteriously stop arriving. And sometimes, well, let's just say that certain caravans never make it through winter. But your scrolls never show that. You just mark them as delinquent, stamp them with a neat red symbol, and move on. One particularly chilly morning, a small group of nomads comes to the capital. They've traveled hundreds of miles with a tribute cart containing wool, dried fish, and a perfectly preserved fox. They ask for nothing in return. When you inquire why, the leader simply shrugs. We prefer to give before being asked. You entered their offering into the records. Then, on a whim, you draw a little fox doodle next to their entry. You figure no one will see it. But a week later, someone adds a small flower. Then another scroll arrives, this one with a fish sketch at the bottom. Soon, a quiet little culture blooms among the bookkeepers. Doodles for trusted clans, jokes in the margins, secret symbols only you understand. The scribes are bored, yes, but they're also human. Sometimes even nomads stop by the archive. They laugh at the idea of being turned into numbers, but they sit patiently while you record their names, their herd sizes, their favorite grazing grounds. You do your best to make the process painless. One child hands you a piece of dried cheese as a thank you. You still have it, mostly because it's too hard to bite. You draft your final version of the nomad tribute model and present it again. This time, no one laughs. It's modest, realistic. It even includes seasonal variance tracking. You get a nod from your superior, his version of thunderous applause. After the meeting, you return to your tent and write it all down. Not just the model, but the jokes, the stories, the personalities behind the scrolls. You even list the fox. The record-keeping matters, but the lives behind the numbers matter more. Outside, the herders are already on the move. You watch their silhouettes disappear into the grasslands, their yurts packed, their children trailing behind the carts. You know you'll see them again. Or maybe not. Either way, they leave behind a trail, not of footsteps, but of tribute, tokens, and tiny sketches on a scroll somewhere in a felt tent right next to your name. There's a commotion near the eastern gate, which in Karakoram terms means someone misplaced a barrel, someone else blamed a horse, and now 4 men are shouting about ink allocation. You ignore it. You're deep in a crisis of your own. The good birch bark parchment is missing. Not misplaced, not borrowed, but gone. The crisp, thick stuff reserved for imperial correspondence, used for the Khan's personal messages, alliance agreements, and the occasional poetic rant. It's softer than leather, smells faintly of sap, and absorbs ink like a dream. You know this because you may have, once, tested it by copying part of a market inventory onto a scrap. Purely academic, totally unauthorized. So when you're summoned to the stationery division by the quartermaster of Imperial Supplies, a man who measures his own heartbeat against the grain count, you know you're about to be blamed for something. He eyes you like you've smuggled the parchment out in your boots. Missing 12 sheets, he says. Good birch bark. Last signed out by the Falconers. You blink. The Falconers? He nods grimly. They said it made excellent liner for the birds' perches. Now, let's pause. This is the Mongol Empire, the largest contiguous empire in history. It runs on horses, bows, iron discipline, and the ability to send a message from Beijing to Baghdad without losing the sender. The stationery is sacred. So when you arrive at the falconry tent trying to suppress both panic and indigestion, you're greeted by the sight of a majestic bird of prey sharpening its beak on an imperial birch scroll. You make a soft noise of betrayal. One of the handlers shrugs. The texture soothes their talons. You consider violence. Then you remember your career trajectory depends on not yelling at people who work directly for the Khan. Instead, you take a diplomatic approach. You ask for the scrolls back. You're handed strips, chewed, half digested. One has feathers stuck to it. You sigh and decide to cut your losses. Historians still argue whether the falconry division of the Mongol Empire held more political weight than its appearance suggested. Some say falconers had access to the Khan's inner circle. Others think they were just glorified bird babysitters with delusions of grandeur. All you know is that they have really sharp gloves and no sense of inventory management. You return to your tent and write up a carefully worded report on non-archival use of premium stationery. It's passive-aggressive, footnoted, and includes a section titled Recommendations for Parchment Conservation in Avian Environments. You feel better. Of course, the next day, your supervisor skims the scroll and chuckles. "Birds need comfort too," he says. "Maybe send them some lower grade stuff next time." You make a mental note to label the next batch Falcon Friendly and secretly hope a scroll gives one of them indigestion. But the issue raises a deeper concern. You've been noticing it more and more lately. Certain divisions hoarding supplies. The veterinary tents have an entire crate of gold ink seals for no clear reason. The meat quarter requisitioned 2 barrels of ink last month, allegedly to mark cattle, but you're convinced someone's using it for calligraphy practice. So you start a private ledger. You call it the Shadow Register. It's unofficial, unsanctioned, slightly petty, and immensely satisfying. You track where scrolls actually go, how many quills vanish each week, who keeps asking for red ink even though their division files in black. You feel like a spy, but a really boring one. A paper detective. A pulp sleuth. Your favorite discovery is that one of the camp cooks has been forging his own requisition slips to order extra cinnamon. When confronted, he claims it's for imperial baking morale. You let it slide because he makes the only edible flatbread in camp. But all of this shines a light on a hard truth. Bureaucracy is like fermented mare's milk. Leave it alone too long and it gets weird, frothy, and potentially hazardous. You draft a proposal for supply reform, shorter request chains, clearer ledgers. You even suggest small colored dots to indicate parchment quality. Blue for elite correspondence, brown for standard use, green for falcon proof. You present it at the weekly tent circle, where fellow scribes sip tea and nod sleepily. Then someone points out a fatal flaw. What if someone hoards the colored dots? You feel your soul deflate slightly. But the exercise isn't wasted. You refine your own tracking habits, learn which scrolls get prioritized, and even discover that certain paper deliveries correspond suspiciously with visiting envoys. One day, a delivery of high-grade parchment precedes the arrival of a Korean delegation. 2 days later, half of it is missing again. You're certain someone's writing poetry, probably love poems. Mongol haikus are a thing, after all. Despite the absurdities, there's a kind of magic in the mess. You know every shade of ink by smell. You can tell which scribe wrote a document just by the slant of their script. You once fixed a treaty draft by scraping off a clause with a fishbone. None of it gets noticed, and none of it gets remembered. Still, when the next batch of birch parchment arrives, carefully packed, sealed, and marked for imperial use only, you tuck 2 sheets away, just in case. Maybe for a letter home, maybe for something beautiful, or maybe one day just to remind yourself that even in a world ruled by swords and fire, someone had to care about paper, and someone had to stop the falcons from using it as a nest liner. It's late afternoon, and your eyes are crossing from too much goat census. You've spent the past 4 hours reviewing a village's wool production numbers, which are suspiciously identical to last year's, down to the stray scribble in the margin that says, "Bored now." You suspect copy-paste fraud, ancient edition. So, when you catch your fellow clerk Bolad giggling over a scroll, you're curious. Not suspicious yet, just curious. He's a quiet type, prone to spilling tea and whispering apologies to his quill when it breaks. Giggles are not in his usual range. You wander over, tea in hand, and peek over his shoulder. What you see stops you cold. Not tax figures, not wool inventories, not even complaints about falcon-related parchment losses. Poetry. Actual, honest-to-great con poetry. In the margin of a very serious transport register about dried fish, someone has written, "She walks through smoke like springtime's breath, a shadow wrapped in silk and death." You stare at it. Bolad turns red and yanks the scroll away. It's nothing. It's rhythmic commentary. You raise an eyebrow. Historians still argue whether Mongol court poetry ever achieved the refinement of its Chinese, Persian, or Arab counterparts. The records show Genghis Khan admired bards and often had songs composed about victories, but personal verse, romantic flourishes tucked into supply lists, that rarely makes it into textbooks. But here it is, clear as ink. You let it go for now, but your curiosity won't. Over the next week, you start paying more attention to margins, and that's when the floodgates open. Love poems in barley shipment logs, limericks about saddle chafing in requisition forms, a full ballad, 2 stanzas at a time, spread across a month of border tax documents. It's like a secret society, hidden in plain sight. You start to piece it together. There's a network of scribes, your colleagues, using the empire's endless documents as a kind of illicit canvas, not for protest, not even for rebellion, just expression, secret, careful, and deeply human. You even recognize recurring motifs. One scribe favors metaphors involving fire and rain. Another prefers odd animal comparisons. Your eyes are like startled badgers is now burned into your memory forever. Some are heartbreakingly beautiful. Others are absolutely terrible. You find one that simply reads, "She left. I burned my scroll. Now I owe the Khan 3 quills." You start collecting them, quietly, not officially, just a side scroll tucked beneath your cot. You copy the verses down at night, humming their rhythms, wondering who wrote them and why. And then, one day, you find your own handwriting. The transport log you filed last month, with an unfamiliar stanza added in the margin. It's a reply. The silk she wore was meant for you. The smoke? Just ink that never dried. You freeze. This is now personal. You begin to correspond, carefully, in lines that look like corrections, in scripts that slant just slightly to the left. You don't sign your name, but your style is recognizable to anyone who knows their clerical strokes. Precise, elegant, with just a touch of over-flourish on your final consonants. You don't know who they are. Could be Bolad. Could be someone higher up. Could be the cook, which honestly would explain a lot about the flatbread poetry. Every day becomes a little mystery. Will they reply? Will the next poem land in a parchment roll from the southern provinces? Will you recognize the rhythm, the favorite metaphor? One poem is folded twice and tucked into a scroll of livestock losses. It reads, "Your ink is sharp as warhorse teeth, yet gentler than a morning sigh." You smile. You copy it down. You get to work. Still, The reality of your job never stops. Amid the secret poems, you still track ox counts, tax repayments, and an increasingly dramatic case of scroll theft involving a merchant, a falconer, and what may or may not be a stolen love letter disguised as a meat inventory. One evening, after a long day of scribing, you find Bolad by the fire. You casually ask if he's ever written poetry. He chokes on his tea. Me? No, I'm more of a numerical guy. You don't push it. But when you later find a poem referencing a numerical guy with quiet eyes, you suspect otherwise. Historians won't know this. The official records will survive, maybe, but the poems will vanish, burned in raids, smudged into obscurity, or simply lost in the sheer avalanche of history. But right now, they're real, and they matter. You write your own, for the first time not tucked into someone else's margins, but scrolled openly, though still on the back of a spare scroll. It's clumsy, but honest. You don't sign your name. You leave it in the communal ink pot, tucked under the lid of the red ink jar. If they find it, they'll know. If they don't, well, it's not like you haven't written into silence before. The next morning, someone's refilled your ink pot, and inside the lid, just 2 words. Keep writing. You do. The tent smells like goat butter again. Not the kind that's melting happily over hot dumplings, but the kind that's been used to waterproof scroll cases, clean a quill tip, and maybe, just maybe, as hair product by one particularly creative clerk named Narantuya. You breathe through your mouth and settle in for the day. The rhythm of life in Karakoram's scribal district is something most would never imagine. While the rest of the empire stirs with galloping hooves and clashing sabers, here time ticks to the sound of scratching quills, the occasional tea kettle whistle, and someone cursing softly when they smudge a freshly drawn seal. You've developed routines, rituals almost. First, you light your little oil lamp, not for light, but for smell. It has a sprig of dried juniper wedged near the wick. Then you recite the morning mantra that keeps you sane. No scrolls before tea, no math before dumplings, no talking to Narantuya before her second nap. This is your life now. Your day's assignment is standard, revising tax ledgers from the border provinces. But it's not the math that gets you, it's the smells. Each scroll carries the scent of where it came from. Western steppe scrolls reek of smoky tents and dried mare's milk. Southern scrolls arrive damp with monsoon humidity and a faint note of turmeric. One, sent from a mountain post near Tibet, smells unmistakably like goat butter and regret. You've learned to identify regions with your nose faster than some can with a seal. One afternoon, you catch a fresh delivery of scrolls from the Chagatai Khanate. The courier looks exhausted, half his beard frozen, the other half singed. You ask him what happened. "Fire," he mutters, "then snow, then the same goat twice." You don't ask follow-ups. You just take the scrolls and promise to log them before mold sets in. Inside the tent, life is more predictable, comforting in its own chaotic way. Narantuya is already curled in the corner, sleeping on a pile of discarded vellum. Her snores are oddly soothing, like a distant drumbeat under the scratch of quills. Bolod is bent over his desk, muttering rhymes into a record of fish taxes. You're fairly certain he's working on a new poem disguised as an import chart. Again. You smile. This is your strange little family. Outside, the empire churns on. Armies move, borders shift. But inside the tent, you weigh paper instead of prisoners. You count jars of butter, not barrels of blood. And it's not as boring as you thought it would be. Every so often, someone bursts into the tent with a crisis. Today, it's a seal runner, one of the boys who delivers wax sealing kits from tent to tent. His hands are black with soot and panic. He whispers, "Someone used the Khan seal on a dumpling order." Breathless. You blink. The seal? He nods. Bolode lets out a slow, horrified exhale. Narantuya doesn't stir. Apparently, one of the cooks, perhaps high on too much cinnamon, got a hold of the imperial seal box. Instead of placing a wax dot on treaty parchment, he pressed the gold medallion on an order form that read, "Required, 44 dumplings, must be hot, preferably pork." You sigh. You're going to be writing scrolls about this for weeks. You assign yourself the investigation, because no one else will do it without passive-aggressive poetry involved. You track the seal's movement across the camp, which turns out to be surprisingly well documented. Someone in logistics has been secretly logging every time it changes hands, probably out of paranoia, or maybe just for fun. Historians still argue whether the Khan ever personally used his seals or delegated entirely to his clerks. What they don't know is that sometimes those clerks were extremely hungry. You eventually find the culprit, not a cook, but a junior courier who mistook the seal for a dumpling stamp. He claims ignorance. He also offers you a dumpling. You take it. Back in your tent, the butter smell is stronger now. Someone has spilled a jar onto the supply list, which you now have to recopy from memory. You mumble to yourself and start again. You've done this so many times, you could recreate an entire goat census with your eyes closed and 2 fingers. The sun dips low, turning the tent walls gold. You clean your tools, your quill, your wax press, your parchment knife, stained faintly red from last week's pomegranate lunch. Each object is familiar, comforting, sacred in its way. You sit back for a moment and listen. There's the rustle of parchment, the soft snore of Narantuya, the occasional grunt from Bolod as he finds another rhyme for tariff, and underneath it all, the gentle flutter of a scroll being unrolled, like wings unfolding. You remember your first day here, how you trembled holding your first ink pot, how you stained your robe and your dignity with equal clumsiness. You've come far. You're still anonymous, still background noise to the empire, but you're good at what you do, quietly, precisely, joyfully sometimes. Later, as the moon rises, you sit outside your tent with a cup of something hot and fermented. You smell like ink, goat butter, and an administrative mystery still waiting to be solved. And somehow, that's enough. You wake to the sound of someone whispering your name. Not a shout, not a knock on the tent pole. Just your name, softly, like parchment brushing parchment. When you set up, half covered in scrolls, face imprinted with the pattern of a ledger column, there's no one in the tent. Only a breeze curling under the flap and the faint scent of sandalwood, which means only one thing. Someone from the intelligence office has been here. You groan and stretch. Intelligence always comes in whispers, and they never leave behind snacks. There's a scroll waiting by your writing block, sealed with black wax. That's unusual. Not red, not gold, black. The last time someone used black wax, a whole province disappeared from the tax records for a week, only to reappear with slightly more sheep and a new spelling. You break the seal. Inside is a request. Begin keeping duplicate records. Do not discuss. Use watermarked parchment for your eyes only. No name, no signature, just a smudge where someone clearly changed their mind about writing "thank you." And just like that, you're in the double ledger game. Spying in the Mongol Empire isn't all poisoned arrows and secret tunnels. A lot of it looks like this: paperwork, records copied twice, one version for the Central Archives, the other for someone else, somewhere else. You are now a very quiet piece of a very quiet machine. The irony is rich. You, the poet-loving, dumpling-hungry scroll jockey, now playing cloak and dagger with numbers and ink. Historians still argue whether the Mongols had a formal spy network, or whether they simply co-opted traders, monks, and bureaucrats. From where you sit, huddled over two nearly identical scrolls, and trying to remember which version mentions the falcon feed shortage, it definitely feels formal and very, very exhausting. Your first assignment is subtle. The city of Al-Malik, far to the west, has been submitting oddly smooth tribute records. Too smooth. Not a single tax discrepancy in 8 months? Unbelievable. You're tasked with recopying the scrolls, noting anything odd. You don't even know what odd means, but you do know that someone went to the trouble of writing this in black wax, so you assume it's above your parchment pay grade. You study the scrolls like they're poems, looking for rhythm, pattern, the absence of chaos. And you find it. Every number ends in 0 or 5. That's not a pattern. That's laziness, or deliberate smoothing. You mark the scroll with a quiet symbol, a fish drawn backwards. It's your assigned indicator. No one else should notice, but someone will. Over the next few weeks, you develop habits. Every night, you copy 2 ledgers, the official and the real. The real one gets hidden inside the lining of a storage box labeled "candle wicks, substandard." No one touches it. Candle wicks are too boring. You begin to notice more discrepancies. A courier route that doesn't make sense. Twice the length, half the cost. A census with a sudden spike in unmarried men aged 20 to 25. A tax record where the ink seems a little too fresh, too neat. Someone's laundering data, and not very creatively. You report it, quietly. You use the fish symbol again. 2 days later, the courier assigned to Al-Malik is reassigned to falconry. A coincidence, sure, and probably a punishment, given the bird's temperaments and taste for expensive parchment. But you're not just reporting now. You're watching. You track who requests which scrolls. You see which clerks get invited to the Khan's administrative reviews, and which ones stop showing up altogether. You learn to smile with half your face, to nod in ways that don't reveal you're cataloging which ink pot each person uses. Bolad suspects something. He catches you one night, writing in double columns, and raises an eyebrow. You shrug. Practice. He doesn't press. Narantuya definitely knows. She looks at you, says nothing, and slides you an extra dumpling without explanation. You find your way into a rhythm. Spy scribe by night, mild-mannered tax clerk by day. It sounds exciting, but really it just means more paperwork and more caution. You spend half your time remembering which version of the scroll you're holding. Once you nearly submit the real version to a delegate from Bukhara. You catch it just in time and fake a sneeze to cover your panic. And then there's the problem of guilt. You're not comfortable knowing someone's punishment might start with your ink. You try not to think about it, but when a friendly quartermaster goes quiet after you report a tampered grain tally, it lingers. He always overcounted wheat by just a little, maybe for his family, maybe for someone else's. But still, you wrote the symbol. The fish swam, and the net closed. You begin writing in poetry again, just to stay human. A few lines each night, hidden between scrolls, tucked beneath jars of goat butter. You don't share them, you just need to hear your own voice again. One reads, "My quill grows quiet, the paper waits, the truth comes slow, but rarely late." Another says, "Ink forgets, but I remember. Fish swim, and empires tremble." You don't know if anyone finds them. You hope not. Or maybe you hope they do, but only someone who needs to. Eventually, another scroll arrives, black wax again. Fewer words this time. "Thank you. The candlewick box was clever. Continue." No name, no reward, just that. And honestly, it's enough. You light your oil lamp, you dip your quill, and you begin copying a new ledger. One for the empire, one for the shadows. You smell the ink, the goat butter, the cold wind curling beneath the tent flap. And you get to work. The traders arrive with the wind. Not metaphorically. The wind is howling, rattling the canvas of your tent and carrying with it the smells of cinnamon, camel, sweat, and cloves. You're still blinking sleep from your eyes when a runner bursts in and blurts, "Silk Road's open again!" You groan. Your back hasn't recovered from last week's census pile. Whenever the Silk Road opens, it's like someone kicks a hornet's nest. If the hornets were carrying bales of brocade and yelling in 6 different languages. The market tents bloom like wildflowers outside the capital. Foreigners flood in with scrolls, coins, rumors, and things that might be cheese. It's hard to tell. You're not excited. You're assigned. Because someone has to check weights, count bolts of fabric, confirm that genuine Damascus steel isn't just pointy iron with a nice story, and that someone, lucky you, is now standing outside in the dust as a man from Samarkand insists his cinnamon is blessed by holy monks. It smells like socks. You write it down anyway. The Silk Road isn't just trade, it's intelligence. Information moves faster than armies, and every merchant is part trader, part gossip, part accidental diplomat. You log everything: prices, weights, customs paid in livestock, that one German who keeps trying to pay in holy relics. A fingernail? Really? You carry a small ledger just for stories. Not officially, just ones that stick in your head. A Persian man tells you that in Isfahan they're building wind towers that make houses cool even in the desert heat. You doodle one on your scroll. A Chinese herbalist gives you a piece of bitter root wrapped in paper and tells you it can cure sadness. You don't believe her. You still keep it in your pouch. Historians often note that the Mongol Empire protected trade with remarkable efficiency. Caravans could cross entire continents under the Khan's banners. But they rarely mention the toll collectors, the inspectors, the weary, ink-stained bureaucrats squinting at jars of saffron trying to decide if it's grade A or something someone dyed with beet juice. Spoiler, it's usually beet juice. You and a small team work from dawn to dusk. Your table is a crate, your scales slightly crooked, your ink pot kept in a leather pouch to stop it from drying out in the wind. You mark goods, issue receipts, settle disputes. You've become very good at pretending you understand Persian weights. You nod, you stamp, you smile, you send them on. And then, one afternoon, a Venetian merchant arrives. He has blue eyes, a crooked smile, and a crate full of glass that sparkles like water. You've never seen anything like it. Goblets, beads, mirrors. A child in a noble family would trade a horse for one of these. He speaks in mangled Mongolian, so you conduct business in broken Arabic. He gestures a lot. Somehow, you understand each other. He offers you a small glass pendant as a sample. You offer him tea and a place to rest his camels. He tells you tales of storms at sea and cities built on wooden stilts. You pretend not to be fascinated. You are deeply fascinated. That night, you sit by your tent and hold the glass bead up to the firelight. It catches the flame and turns it into a miniature sun. You've been staring at paper so long that it's strange to hold something fragile, beautiful, and not covered in ink. Narantuya wanders over, squints at it, and asks if it's edible. You say no. She loses interest. Over the next few days, the traders keep coming. A man from Delhi with perfume sealed in wax balls. A woman from the Caucasus with a wolf pup on a leash, and a cart full of carved bone combs. A monk from somewhere west of Kiev who offers you a strange flat bread he calls pizza. You smile politely and pretend it doesn't taste like regret. You start to lose track of days. You write until your fingers ache. You weigh sacks of rice. You test inks from India. You copy labels in 4 scripts because no one can agree on which one to use. You dream of cinnamon barrels chasing you through the tent city. And then finally, the market thins. The wind shifts. The traders pack up. You're left with your ledgers, your scrolls, your little bead of glass, tucked safely into your pouch. Before the Venetian leaves, he bows. Not deep, not formal, just enough. He says something in Italian, gentle, melodic. You don't understand the words, but you understand the feeling. Connection, however brief. Later that week, your supervisor reviews your trade reports. He grunts approvingly and asks who logged the wolf pup importation. You say it was Narantuya. He says nothing. It's probably for the best. At night, you sit with Bolad and watch the stars. He talks about poetry again. You talk about glass. Neither of you mentions the war bands passing through 2 days ago. You've both learned to enjoy the quiet moments when they come. You're not a merchant. You're not a diplomat, but you realize you're something stranger, a recorder of crossings, the one who sees it all, even if no one sees you. You open your scroll and write just for yourself. The road winds, the traders come, and still I sit, and still I sum. There's a bowl of dumplings balanced precariously on your ledger. You stare at it. You didn't put it there. Bolod peeks over the edge of a scroll and grins. You've got a secret admirer, he whispers, nudging Narantuya with his elbow. She snorts awake. sees the dumplings, and immediately begins plotting a heist. But you already know who left them. There's a blot of blue ink on the rim of the bowl, same kind you used last week, same kind that stains the robes of one particular scribe in the document dispatch tent. Her name is Erkatu. She's newish, quiet, writes with her left hand, smiles like she's trying not to. She once asked you to borrow a quill, and you handed her your best one. You've regretted nothing since. You think she likes you. You know you like her. And this is something. Love and Karakoram isn't all galloping across the steppe with wind-swept hair and promises of shared yurts. Sometimes it's dumplings, gently warm, left on a tax ledger that smells faintly of sheep. You accept the offering with the solemnity it deserves. You eat 2 dumplings, set one aside for Narantulya, she's already pouting, and wrap the last in cloth to return, with a note, 4 words, written in the margin of an unused grain record. Best dumplings I've had. It's the start of something slow, gentle, hidden in scrolls. The next day, a ledger from the northern provinces arrives with a receipt slip written in 2 inks, one black, one blue. The numbers are real. The margin contains a haiku. Ink dries faster here, but thoughts of you smudge the lines. Should I share my tea? You don't respond in poetry. You respond with numbers, a list of the most recent ink imports into the city, and a note beneath it. You're overusing the blue, I'll get more. She replies with a perfectly filled table of horse tax exemptions, except all the horses are named after herbs: basil, mint, fennel, ginger. You've started carrying your records more carefully. Historians rarely document relationships like this. They'll tell you who married whom, which alliance was brokered with which princess, and maybe, they'll mention a famous courtier with a scandal, but not the quiet love between 2 clerks who pass flirtations in the margin of census records. And yet, it exists, in every fold, every ink-smudged scrap. The romance isn't dramatic. It unfolds between routine and repetition. You start leaving scrolls for her to review. You always pretend it's because her calligraphy is more legible. She always pretends she believes you. Sometimes you both work late, staying just a little longer after the others have left. The tent quiets. The ink dries slower. The fire crackles, and you talk. Not loudly, not about anything important, but you talk. She tells you she once considered being a healer, but numbers made more sense. You tell her you once wanted to ride with the messengers. She laughs. You'd fall off a camel. Fair point. One night, she hands you a scrap of paper, just a corner, torn from something older. On it is a miniature drawing of 2 ink pots, side by side, their quills leaning together. You carry it in your sleeve now. You've stopped trying to explain why. Of course, not everything is dumplings and quiet smiles. There's tension in the camp lately. Not between you 2, but in the air. A whisper of an audit, a visiting official. Someone's been caught forging grain returns. You're not involved, but you're close enough to feel the frost forming around the fire pits. The intelligence office has been sniffing around again. Your black wax contacts send no messages. You keep your head down. One day, you're called in to clarify a scroll Erkatu copied, a discrepancy in the camel counts. The official reviewing it is not from Karakoram. He wears his hat too low, his eyes too sharp. You keep your voice calm. You explain the mix-up. Later that night, Erkatu appears at your tent. Was it bad? She asks. No, you say. But I didn't like how he looked at you. She shrugs. He didn't understand the joke about Ginger the horse. You smile. You both sit outside, sharing a bowl of something hot and vaguely cabbage adjacent. She hands you a fresh scroll to review. It's perfectly organized. At the bottom, a single line. When the Empire quiets, I'll tell you my real name. You don't press. You don't need to. The next morning, you find another bowl of dumplings on your ledger. This time, they're a little burned. You eat them anyway. You are not a fast man, but today, you run. You run with scrolls stuffed into your robe, a quill clamped between your teeth, and your sandals flapping in protest. Around you, the city is alive with motion. Horses kicking up dust, messengers darting like startled fish, and one particularly large chicken that refuses to get out of your way. Because today, the Mongol mail must ride, and you're behind. It started with a simple memo. It always does. Your supervisor handed you a scroll this morning with a sleepy grunt. "Postal relay expansion," he said, as if it were a suggestion, not a mandate from the Khan's inner circle. You unrolled the scroll, read the contents, and nearly spilled your tea. The Empire wants a new relay station system, faster, more precise, capable of moving messages from Karakorum to the Caspian Sea in under 10 days. 10 days! You're still stuck trying to get your own scrolls from one tent to another without smudging the ink. Historians often praise the Mongol Yam system, the vast network of postal stations that stretched across the empire, but what they rarely mention is how much math it involved. You spend the next 5 hours calculating horse stamina, average courier speed, station distance, forage consumption, and your personal favorite, accidental wolf interference. You dig out old maps, sketch new ones. You argue with Bolode about whether snow slows a messenger more than sand. Narantuya votes for sand, but only because it gets in the tea. She's somehow not wrong. Your job isn't just to plan the new relay posts. You're also tasked with ensuring the scribe ledger interface is standardized across all locations. That's a fancy way of saying you need every postmaster to stop using whatever local symbols they've invented and start writing like they actually went to school. You draft a new relay form. It's elegant, efficient, beautiful. It includes courier name, origin and destination, message category, urgent, political, personal, awkward apology, animal used, horse, camel, donkey, highly motivated goat, estimated travel time, ink color used, because someone in the southern stations insists on using purple. You deliver it to the station master with pride. He stares at it for a long moment. Where's the space for emergency snack requests? You take the scroll back and add a section. You spend days mapping relay points, interviewing couriers, measuring travel time with sand clocks, and testing saddlebag waterproofing with buckets of soup. You learn that one station has been feeding its horses fermented berries, which explains a lot about the slanted writing in the Western dispatches. Then you meet Tomur, the fastest courier in Karakorum. He's wiry, smells faintly of dust and adrenaline, and claims he once outran his own message. You're skeptical, but he agrees to help test your new relay route. You hand him a scroll sealed in your new double wax system, red for urgency, green for please don't eat this scroll again. You watch him mount his horse with practiced grace, then gallop off in a trail of speed and hooves. 3 days later, the scroll returns, unsmudged, on time, with a note from the Western station master. Finally, a form that doesn't make me weep. Thank you. You feel like a minor deity of mail. Erketu finds you that evening, hunched over a diagram of station distances. She sets down a small bowl of pickled radishes and says, "You're glowing." You blink. "I'm covered in ink and saddle grease." She grins. "Exactly." The next challenge is getting people to actually use the system. You write a brief manual, 5 neat scrolls titled, "So You've Been Assigned to the Yam Network." Inside, clear instructions, lots of drawings, and only 3 passive-aggressive jokes about punctuation. Ballade adds a poem in the back. "Swift rides the wind, with scroll in jaw, but not too swift, or it might fall." Not your best collaborative work, but it does rhyme. As the system takes shape, you start noticing small improvements. Replies arrive faster. Emergency requests actually make it before the emergencies end. One station even returns a missing census scroll, which you thought was lost to a goat uprising. Of course, there are still hiccups. One station sends every message folded into origami horses. Another replaces ink color with mood of writer and writes all messages in angry red. And one courier insists on singing every message before delivering it. But overall, it works. You're proud and exhausted. One evening, while updating the central YAM ledger, you realize something. This system, your system, connects the empire more than almost anything else. Armies move, borders shift, but paper stays. Paper flies. Paper tells the next tent what the last tent was thinking. You sit outside your tent, glass bead in your pocket, tea in hand, scroll across your lap. The moon rises. The wind whispers across the plain. And somewhere out there, a courier is riding fast under the stars, a scroll tucked into their sleeve. Your scroll. Your words. Your ink, keeping the empire together, one hoofbeat at a time. Kublai Khan arrives with almost no warning. Just a dust storm, a column of horses, and the unmistakable sound of someone yelling at an official about the size of their welcome tent. You're in the middle of reviewing quarterly hay distribution records when the announcement comes down. His Highness, grandson of Genghis, future ruler of many things, desires a tour of the bureaucratic facilities. You look around the tent. There's ink on the walls. There's a quill sticking out of Bolad's hair. Narantuya is napping under a pile of rice receipts. Somewhere, a goat that definitely doesn't belong to anyone is chewing on a tax scroll. This is not the look of imperial efficiency. You have maybe 2 hours to turn your disorganized patchwork of ledger life into something that resembles the clean, calculated machine Kublai probably imagines keeps the empire humming. You bark orders like a man possessed. Bolad, fix your hair. Narantuya, wake up and hide anything that smells like butter. No poetry on display. I repeat, no poetry. Erketel appears with a damp cloth and a tired smile. Do I need to charm a prince today? You grin. Just don't let him see the goat. She doesn't ask which goat. Everyone knows the goat. You sweep the tent floor, restack the scrolls, and rewrite a few of the more chaotic ledgers in your best handwriting. You even spritz a little herbal water over the entrance to mask the scent of overworked paper pushers. And then he arrives. Not with trumpets, not with fanfare. Kublai Khan walks in like a man who owns the ground and the clouds above it, flanked by a few bored-looking guards and an aide carrying what might be a cup of yak milk tea on a golden saucer. He's younger than you expected. Broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, wearing a robe with dragons so finely stitched it hurts your eyes. He pauses just inside the tent. The dust settles around him like it knows better than to keep floating. You bow, deeply. Everyone does. He doesn't speak immediately, just walks past the scroll shelves, brushes a finger along a rack of ledgers, squints at a map of trade routes. Finally, he turns to you. You keep track of all this? You nod. Yes, Highness. All the taxes, the records, What is this? He points to a scroll titled Horse Inventory, Autumn Quarter, Region 7. That's a list of horses, sire. He unrolls it. One of them is named Pickles? You glance at Bolad. He looks innocent. There was a naming error, you say. Kublai huffs something between a chuckle and a sigh. My grandfather conquered half the known world, and you named the horses after condiments. You're not sure if he's amused or furious. Maybe both. He keeps walking. As he surveys the work, you explain how scrolls are received, copied, reviewed, and distributed. You show him the double copy system, the seal register, the transit logs. He nods thoughtfully, asks precise questions. You answer with just enough detail to impress him, but not enough to bore. Historians often debate whether Kublai truly respected the bureaucratic machine of the Mongol Empire or merely tolerated it as a necessity. But today, in this cramped little felt tent that smells faintly of ink and disaster averted, he listens. He picks up one of your new relay forms, the one with emergency snack requests. He holds it up. Who made this? You raise your hand. He studies you. You think of everything, don't you? You smile faintly. Only when I have enough tea. He smiles back, just slightly. Then he turns to his aide. Let's take 3 of these forms back with us and find out what other provinces are using. If it's not better than this, they'll be using this from now on. Your heart flips a little. The aide scribbles something. You try not to visibly glow. Before he leaves, Kublai walks past the central desk, where a small folded piece of parchment sits forgotten. It's a poem, Erketu's handwriting. He glances at it, then back at you. Scribes who write poetry make better historians. You nod, surprised. So I've heard. He leaves without further ceremony. And suddenly, your tent feels smaller. As the flaps settle, you release the breath you've been holding since he stepped in. Bolad collapses into a pile of scrolls. Narantuya immediately resumes napping. You and Erketu share a look that is equal parts relief and unbelieving joy. He liked the snack form? You nod. He might have taken it home. Later that evening, a sealed scroll arrives for you, a simple message. Your forms are in review for court-wide use. Please do not die unexpectedly. It's unsigned, but definitely from the palace. You hold it like a treasure, then carefully file it under unlikely victories. And just before bed, you notice a new line in Erketu's logbook. Even the grandson of an emperor stops for a good list. It begins, as many disasters do, with a cheerful announcement. A new decree from the Khan's council. Standardize all provincial tax records to the new format. Effective immediately. You read the scroll 3 times, hoping it changes. It does not. You feel the quiet dread of a man standing at the base of a mountain that just sprouted overnight. one made entirely of paper. Your team is now responsible for retrofitting an entire empire's worth of tax ledgers into your neat, efficient, newly approved format, the same one Kublai smiled at, which now comes with exactly 0 margin for error and infinite expectations. In theory, it's simple. In practice, it's like herding flaming yaks through a calligraphy competition. Within hours, the first wave of scrolls begins to arrive, piled high, tied with twine, carried by donkeys, couriers, and one man who claims to have floated in on a raft made of damp papyrus. The scrolls don't stop. They come from the north with frost still on them, from the deserts cracked and sun-streaked, from the mountains heavy with wax and spelling mistakes. You're quickly buried. Literally. One scroll avalanche knocks over a shelf and traps Narantua for 6 minutes before Bolad digs her out with a soup ladle. The air in the tent turns dry, electric. The ink never quite dries. Your fingers are stained black. Your robes are dotted with smudges. Your dreams are filled with column headers and incorrect tallies of millet. You split the team into stations. Bolad handles poetry censorship, not because it's necessary, but because if he's not assigned that job, he'll do it anyway. Narantua reviews dates and place names. Her attention span is powered entirely by fried dumplings and spite, but she's ruthless with misplaced hyphens. You handle the worst part, reconciling totals. Historians often praise Mongol efficiency, the seamless flow of tribute and grain. They don't mention that no one agrees on how to count ducks. One province lists them by weight, another by volume, a third by how many could fit on a cart if they sat still, which they won't. The worst offenders, the southern provinces. Beautiful handwriting, 0 consistency. One scroll lists 4,000 sheep, 3,200 sheep, and a very nice sheep, all in separate columns. You cry a little, quietly. You begin working late, later than usual. The oil lamps burn down to nubs. Your quill tips fray and fray again. Urketu sneaks you tea and pastries, sometimes shaped like miniature scrolls. You pretend not to be moved. Then, one night, you fall asleep at your desk. You wake to ink smeared across your cheek and a blanket over your shoulders. A real one. Wool. It smells faintly of juniper. You look up to see Urketu asleep at the opposite desk, her head resting on a ledger, mouth slightly open, still clutching a correction brush. You don't wake her. Instead, you quietly pick up her brush, clean it, and tuck it beside her ink pot. There's a soft clatter outside, more scrolls arriving. You hate everything. By week 3, you lose count of how many ledgers you've revised. You've built a system, a kind of scroll triage. Urgent records go left, weird ones go right. Anything involving goats gets its own pile, mostly for Narantua to interrogate. One day, you find a scroll that just says, "All taxes paid, trust us." You do not. Amid the chaos, there's humor. Someone sends in a ledger stamped with a tiny drawing of a dancing bear. Someone else includes an apology note that reads, "We had a math person, but he ran away with a flute player. Sorry." You save that one. But the weight builds. The scrolls keep coming. Your tent feels smaller. Your breath fogs from exhaustion. You write until your wrist aches, then switch hands. You stop dreaming. Or maybe you keep dreaming, and the dreams just look like more scrolls. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stops. No scrolls arrive the next morning, or the next. The dust settles. You look around and realize you've done it. The reformatting is complete. You collapse into a heap of scrolls that now smell less like ink and more like victory. Erketu finds you hours later, curled up, drooling onto a ledger about sheep to barley trade ratios. She nudges you awake with the toe of her boot. "You survived," she says. "Barely. I think one of the ledgers bit me." "Don't worry," she says, grinning. "I bit it back." You laugh. The first real laugh in days. That evening, the team gathers around a fire outside the tent. No squirrels, no quills, just warm food, sleep-deprived giggles, and the feeling of collective survival. You share stories from the worst ledgers. Narantiyaya reads aloud a goat tax record written entirely in rhyme. You toast to the empire, to the scrolls, to not having to read about poultry for a few blessed days. And quietly, to yourselves, you and Erketu toast with teacups and meet eyes over the flames. In the morning, the work will begin again. But tonight, the silence of completed paperwork is the most beautiful sound in the world. You don't expect retirement to smell like sheep, but then again, you didn't expect anything about your life to involve quite this much parchment, secrecy, or fermented mare's milk. So maybe it makes sense that when your scroll-wielding days come to a close, they do so in a modest jur, pitched on a hillside just outside Karakoram, with a view of the valley and a constant, low-level bleeding soundtrack. The letter comes in a plain scroll tube, no wax seal, just a scribbled note from your supervisor, who, to his credit, has aged as badly as you have. It reads, "You've done enough. Go rest. Take some scrolls with you if it helps." You reread the message 3 times before you believe it. You tell your colleagues the next morning. Narantuya looks up from a barrel of misfiled barley counts and says, "You'll last a week, maybe." Bolad gets misty-eyed and immediately begins composing a retirement poem that rhymes inkpot with forgot. You ask him politely to stop. Erketu doesn't say much at first, just sets a fresh cup of tea on your desk and touches your hand as she passes. Her eyes linger on yours, quiet and soft and knowing. You spend your last few days in the archive tent sorting through personal effects. Quills, broken and intact. Scraps of poetry. The glass bead from the Venetian trader. A piece of birch bark someone once used to confess they'd fallen asleep copying sheep tax reports. You keep that one. It feels honest. You don't take much, just what fits in a leather pouch. One ledger, your favorite ink brush, a folding knife that once removed a dried dumpling from the inside of a storage jar, and a sealed scroll from Erketu with instructions not to open it until you're properly bored. You ride out at dawn, mostly alone. A young clerk volunteers to help you set up your jur. You let him, even though he nails the floor slats in the wrong direction. You don't correct him. That was the old you. Retirement isn't so bad. There's a stove, a decent chair, a goat that might be pregnant, and of course, scrolls. The council allowed you to take a few non-essential records. You chose some of your favorites. The scroll with the duck weight dispute, the rice tax that somehow included a drawing of a bear in a hat, and the census where half the family names were vegetables. You don't miss the chaos, but you do miss the rhythm. So, naturally, you start organizing. Just a little. You set up a shelf made of crates, sort your scrolls by region, and begin transcribing them onto clean bark. Not for the empire, not for anyone, really. Just for yourself. The act of writing, of preserving, of remembering, has been with you longer than your own name. You're not about to stop now.
Historians still argue whether retired officials of the Mongol administration played any role in shaping future policy. Most say no. A few suspect certain reforms originated from the countryside, filtered back through apprentices. You smile whenever you read that. You've certainly sent a few scrolls back in, disguised as notes from an observant old man. One day, a courier arrives. Young, nervous, carries a letter from Bolad, who now oversees the Poetry Review Division. You laugh, loudly. Apparently, he's implemented a formal grading scale for emotional accuracy. You suspect chaos. Another day, Narantuya visits. She's older now, still sarcastic, still suspicious of warm drinks. She brings fried dumplings and a scroll of riddles someone slipped into the Falcon records by mistake. You spend the whole afternoon trying to solve one about a fish who forgets how to swim. And eventually, Erketu comes too. She brings tea and a little wooden box. You open it to find a fresh ink pot carved with your initials and a scroll. Blank, except for the first line. There is still more to write. You don't ask if she's staying. She doesn't ask if you want her to. You both just understand. Evenings become soft. You sit outside together, wrapped in wool, watching the stars emerge over the steppe. You trade stories of forgotten scrolls and ridiculous taxes. Sometimes you argue about punctuation. One night, she finally asks, "Did you ever open my retirement scroll?" You shake your head. Didn't want to use it up too soon. She smiles. "You should. It's got a poem in it and a map." "A map?" "To a dumpling cart I liked as a girl." You blink. "This is your idea of a romantic gesture?" "Obviously." You open the scroll, read the poem. It's simple and clumsy and perfect. The next morning, you try to follow the map. You get lost almost immediately, but the walk is lovely. There's a breeze today. It slips in through the flap of your jur, lifting the corner of your ledger and nudging a scrap of parchment off the desk like a cat seeking attention. Outside, the grass whispers in long waves, golden and soft. The steppe is awake, but gently so. No thunder of hooves, no messenger calls, no shouting over bad scroll math. Just the hum of a distant stream and the occasional low bleat from your very opinionated goat. You sip tea. It's not great. You miss the sharp bitterness of camp-boiled brews shared over frantic paperwork. But this tea is quiet, warm, honest. The quill in your hand is old, slightly crooked. You've rewound it with thread so many times it's more binding than feather. Still, it works. Your handwriting has slowed, grown wider, more fluid. There's no rush now, no audits, no black wax scrolls hidden under blankets. Just you, the paper, and your thoughts. Today, you're writing stories. Not the official kind, not ledgers or policies or supply chain reports. Stories. Of the poetry hidden between tax scrolls. Of a horse named Pickles and a courier who sang. Of a day when Kublai Khan asked about ink colors and left with your forms in his robe sleeve. You even wrote about the dumplings.
especially the dumplings. You don't expect anyone will read these stories. You write them because they ask to be written. Sometimes in the afternoon, young clerks visit. They arrive out of breath, eyes wide, notebooks clutched tightly. You serve them tea, better than your usual stuff, reserved for guests, and you let them ask questions. Did you really build the relay system? Is it true you once named a tax form after a goat? Did the empire actually function on paperwork, or just the illusion of it? You always laugh at that one. No, you say. It functioned on people who believed the paperwork mattered. And it did. Not just for taxes or treaties, but for the shape it gave to chaos, the way it preserved a city's heartbeat, the way it gave poets a place to write between the lines. And sometimes Erkatu joins these visits. She'll sit beside you, correcting your more dramatic retellings. No, dear, the dumpling was not on fire, it was just warm. She brings out a scroll she's been copying for years, a private anthology of scroll-margin poetry, saved and translated from nearly every region of the empire. Some of the verses are terrible. Most are lovely. A few are clearly bolods. You still see him sometimes. He visits with a procession of absurdly detailed paperwork and a traveling chicken he claims is part of a therapeutic performance grant. Narantia wrote once to say she retired to the desert, opened a tea house, and charges double for scribes. You wouldn't expect less. The empire rolls on. Borders shift, new khans rise. The wind over the steppe smells the same. And now, in the quiet stretch of your final years, you find yourself remembering less of the scrolls and more of the people who touched them. The courier with one boot, the engineer with trebuchet dreams, the falconer who used premium parchment for bird nests, the boy who tripped and dropped a month's worth of census records into a pond and then tried to invent waterproof ink to cover his mistake. You write them all down. Your tent has become a library of lives, not famous, not footnoted, but real. A reminder that even empires built on conquest need someone to measure the cheese, record the storms, and notice when a scroll smells just slightly of cloves. And now, in the quiet stretch of your final years, you add one more entry to your personal records. A final line in that same familiar hand. There was a man who wrote quietly, and because he wrote, others remembered. You sit back, let the quill rest. The fire crackles low. Erkatu leans over and gently blows out the lamp. Now the fire has faded, and the steppe is all shadow and silence. You settle deeper into your seat, warmed by memory, softened by time. Around you, the gur creaks gently, wood stretching under wool. The last of the daylight glows at the edge of the world, golden and slow like a sigh. You listen, not for voices or hoofbeats, but for the quiet rhythm of pages turning in your mind, the scratch of quill on parchment, the echo of a poem hidden in the margin of a supply scroll, the whisper of someone leaving you a dumpling when you needed it most. This story didn't have battles or heroes or grand pronouncements from gilded thrones. It had ink-stained robes and missed deadlines and warm bowls of soup handed from one tired clerk to another. And that's enough. You did what needed doing. You remembered things others forgot. You filed what could have vanished. You caught stories between the lines
and kept them safe, preserved like pressed herbs in a ledger no one thought to check. So rest now. Let the wind carry your breath, soft and even. Let the weight of paper and years drift from your shoulders. There's no more math to do, no more scrolls to sort, no more goats pretending to be accounted for. Just you, the quiet, the page, and sleep.